Hello and welcome to the Black Cat Bushcraft channel. Today I wanted to do a short video with a couple of tips on how to make feather sticks. I know that there's a ton of guys on YouTube that have put out videos on making feather sticks, and a lot of those guys are a whole lot better at it than I am. So there's a ton of good resources here on YouTube if you take time to watch a few videos. The reason I wanted to do this is a good friend of mine, Davis, asked me recently to do a feather stick tutorial on the Black Cat Bushcraft channel. So I did want to respond to that, and I thought I'd share a couple of things that help me to make better feather sticks. When I'm making a feather stick, the first thing I always consider, and probably the most important thing, is material selection. So if you're just walking in the woods and you pick up any piece of wood and go to carve a feather stick, you may end up frustrating yourself more than anything because the material is not really suitable to that kind of carving. If you just pick up, let's say you pick up a piece of oak. Can you make a feather stick with oak? Sure. But is it the easiest thing to carve? Definitely not. And if it's difficult and you're just learning, sometimes that can lead to frustration. In my area, the woods that I look for most are two things. One, I look for pine. If I baton to the center of a pine log and get some of that dry wood out of the center, that makes awesome feather sticks. This is a piece of pine in my hand, actually. And I look for tulip poplar because dry tulip poplar is excellent and carves very easily. Both of these are softer woods. And they also have straight grains to them for the most part, and those are both qualities that lend themselves to carving feather sticks very easily. So softer woods with straight grains. You definitely want dry wood, because since you're using this as a tinder source to get your fire started, or kindling source I should say. So those are the things to consider mostly. Again, pine works great, tulip poplar works great, any soft straight grained woods. Alright, before I mentioned that it's very helpful to baton into a log to cut out your pieces of wood. And the reason being is when you baton through your wood, it's not going to be round anymore. And therefore it will have ridges on it, like at the corner of this piece of wood right here. And I always try to start my feather sticks on a ridge like that because it makes it easier to remove fine material and it's less resistance against your blade. Less surface area, less resistance. That makes it easier to carve. I'm a huge fan of a Scandinavian grind. I almost always carry that as my bushcraft knife. This is just a wood lore inspired knife, custom made. So what I'll do is I'll tilt my Scandi grind until it meets the wood, just like I was going to strop it or sharpen the knife. And now I'll pull the wood as I push the knife and just try to maintain that angle. And you can see that creates that very hair-like fine shaving. Now as I do that, I'm going to create a flat space on the corner of this, and I'm not sure how well you can see that flat space. But basically when you carve off a ridge, you make two more ridges on either side and a flat where you remove material. I'll slightly turn my wood so that I'm hitting one of those two ridges, and I'll continue to carve like that again. And now I'll come back on the other side and remove that other ridge that we did. Okay, so now, between removing the other two ridges, I've created a center ridge, again, that I can come back and carve on. As I continue to carve, I'm going to create a larger flat space overall, and therefore my feathers are going to get slightly bigger. That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing really, because this stuff here will burn up in probably 10 seconds, which is not enough burn time to get your fire started. So I always start with the finest material first, when I have less surface area on my material, and as I continue to carve, my feathers are going to get a little bit larger each time as that flat spot gets bigger on my material, which is good because it's sort of like going from tinder to kindling on your feather stick. I always think about that, three materials. You want your finest material, and then medium material, and then larger material. But all I'm doing with this is I'm just pulling this wood and I'm slightly pushing my knife forward. If anything, I'm probably pushing the wood more than I'm pushing the knife. Excuse me, I'm pulling the wood more than I'm pushing the knife. Okay, so you can see what that's looking like. And you can tell that my material's getting bigger here, whereas I had that hair-like stuff there. This stuff will ignite, which will help to get this stuff ignited, which will get the bigger stuff ignited. So we're going from smaller to larger. Alright, this should be a decent piece of dry tulip poplar that I'll carve a feather stick with. You can see that this is the outer layer where the bark was attached. That's good because that way I know I'm carving in the sapwood of the tree, the outer layers. Alright, again, when you first start, I come down to the base of the blade, tilt the grind of my knife to meet the wood, and then very lightly push the knife or pull the wood, just like that. And I'm choosing to do this standing up, it just seems more comfortable right now. You can obviously do it sitting down or kneeling. Again, as I'm cutting with my knife, I'm sliding all the way up to the belly to get that curling effect that you see there. Right, that helps me a lot to get those curls. Okay, and then the other thing is you want to pay attention to the ridges again. So you always cut a ridge because that's going to give you the finer material. And then I tilt my knife because as I cut one ridge, I create two more ridges and a flat space. You can carve the flat space, but it's more resistance against your blade, and you'll create larger curls by doing that. So I just follow those ridges all the way down. And honestly, tulip poplar is probably my favorite wood for doing this. I've made some nice pine feather sticks, but some of the most beautiful curls I get is with tulip poplar. And the key is to be gentle-handed too. As long as you handle your knife light and just consistently apply pressure, you'll get these nice curls when you make your feather stick. The other thing that's absolute must is a good sharp knife. To get good feathers, fine feathers, you want your blade to be sharp. If you have a dull blade, it's just going to frustrate you, because you'll apply too much force and knock your feathers off. That's the nice thing about this sharp blade, is you don't have to put a lot of force behind it, and so you can control it better. A Mora knife is excellent for this. Those are very thin and sharp knives, and so they tend to make good feather sticks for me. This woodlore style knife is doing excellent too. It's very comfortable to carve this. And I always have my best luck carving feather sticks when I use a Scandi ground knife. You can see how I just kind of slightly turn this, slightly turn to hit that ridge, slightly turn. Some people will focus on angling their knife blade down and then horizontal and then tilt back. I have used that some, but honestly I tend to tilt my blade slightly back so that when I go down I don't cut my feathers off as bad. When I go this way, I tend to go too deep and I lose feathers like that. The advantage of those changed angles is if I cut down like this, a lot of times that'll make the curl go one way. If I cut down like this, it'll go to the other side, and if I cut straight down like this, it'll make a curl in the center. So you can kind of make a thicker feather stick, but honestly the way I do it, that's quite good for me. That works for me. So I just tend to angle the wood and keep my knife consistent. Seems easier to me too if you hold your knife in one position versus changing your knife constantly. Just change the wood and maintain your knife angle as much as you can. Again, as you come up your feather stick, remember that you want to start to make larger material, because you don't want your feather stick to burn up before it does its job of igniting your material, whatever you're trying to ignite in your fire lay. So you can see this material is starting to get more coarse, and that's a good thing, because that stuff will have a longer burn time than this. The finer stuff will ignite the medium, and the medium will ignite the large. Alright, hopefully that'll give you guys some useful tips when you go to carve feather sticks, especially for guys who maybe aren't 100% confident in doing this yet, or if you haven't had a lot of experience with it. This will give you some things to consider when you go to carve your feather sticks. Obviously, I'm not an expert at it, but as you can see, I can make feather sticks that are functional. These are not things that we're going to put up on a shelf. These are things we're going to burn. So they don't have to be beautiful and they don't have to be perfect as long as they're functional. Remember that when you carve your feather sticks, especially if you start to get frustrated. It's just something you're going to burn. As long as you're increasing the surface area of that wood and getting to the dry material, your job is done. If I were to recap the things I would say most important to be successful at making feather sticks, number one is material selection. Find straight grain, soft woods that are dry. Again, batoning to the center of wood will help you to get those pieces that have ridges. You don't want round sticks to carve. Not that you can't do that, but it's not always the easiest thing. You can carve hardwoods. You can carve round hardwoods and make feather sticks. It's just much harder. Just remember, every time you carve off a ridge, you create two more ridges. Rotate your material and carve that next ridge. Remember, when you lay your knife on your material, whatever grind you have on your knife, just tilt your knife until it meets that grind so that the material and the grind are perfectly flat together. and then you can remove that very fine material when you're carving. So pay attention to the grind and the angle of your knife on your material so you don't cut too deep. Also, one of the things that's very helpful for me is start at the base of the blade and slide up to the belly. Some people will say that that's not correct or that's not how they do it, but it works for me. As you can see, I get very fine curls using that method. Start at the base, slide to the belly. The other thing is you can pay attention to angling your blade down and back and keeping it level. I mostly tilt mine back so I don't cut too deep and knock my feathers off, but experts probably will use that method more so than I do. So those are some basic things that you can consider, and if you work with these things, I'm sure that you'll become successful at making feather sticks. Again, just remember, they have to function. They don't have to be pretty. Alright, I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time to tune in for these quick tips on making feather sticks. Davis, I hope that answered any questions that you had, buddy, and hope that'll help you out a little bit. I always appreciate you guys tuning in to the Black Hat Bushcraft channel, and I hope to be talking to you with another video very soon. And until that time, take care, and as always, God bless.